the slow murder of Napoleon Bonaparte. Picture this: the most feared man in Europe, gasping for air like a drowning sailor. That same voice that once roared commands at Austerlitz now barely whispered. The hands that had carved up kingdoms trembled as they clutched a swollen belly. Every meal became torture. Every breath a struggle. Every night a descent into hell. The man who had made Kingsbow was now reduced to something far worse than death on a battlefield. He was dying slowly, deliberately, methodically, trapped on a godforsaken rock in the middle of nowhere. This isn't just the story of how Napoleon died. This is the story of how the British Empire systematically destroyed the greatest military mind in history, one agonizing day at a time. The trap. But let's rewind. How do you kill a legend without making him a martyr? You don't shoot him. You don't hang him. You don't give him the warrior's death he craves. Instead, you bury him alive. After Waterloo shattered his dreams in 1815, the British faced a problem. Napoleon wasn't just any prisoner. He was a living symbol of revolution, a man who had rewritten the map of Europe with his bare hands. Execute him, and he becomes a martyr. Imprison him in Europe, and his supporters would never stop plotting his return. So they chose something far more sinister: St. Helena, a volcanic prison jutting from the South Atlantic, over 4,000 miles from the nearest friendly shore. No trees, no escape, no hope. The British called it exile. Napoleon would later call it slow-motion murder, the perfect prison. Imagine being the most powerful person alive, then waking up in a moldy house surrounded by your enemy. That was Longwood House, Napoleon's final home and his tomb. The walls literally dripped with moisture. The floorboards rotted beneath his feet. The air itself felt heavy, oppressive, designed to crush the spirit of any man foolish enough to dream of empire. But here's what the British didn't expect. Napoleon's body would revolt before his spirit did. Within months of his arrival, something sinister began happening inside the former emperor. His stomach turned against him. Food became the enemy. Sleep became impossible. Was it the damp climate slowly poisoning him? Was it deliberate? Or was his own body finally paying the price for a lifetime of relentless ambition? When the body declares war. The symptoms started small, almost invisible. A little nausea after dinner, some stomach discomfort, nothing the conqueror of Europe couldn't handle. But then the pain began to bite deeper. Every meal became Russian roulette. Would this be the bite that sent him doubled over in agony? Would tonight be the night he'd spend writhing in bed, clutching his abdomen while his guards listened to his groans? The doctors were useless. Worse than useless, they were actively making him sicker. They bled him until he was too weak to stand. They force-fed him mercury compounds that we now know are pure poison. They prescribed treatments that would have killed a healthy man, let alone someone already fighting for his life. And through it all, Napoleon began to suspect the horrible truth. This wasn't random illness. This was assassination by medicine. The transformation. Watch how a god becomes mortal. The man who once rode 16 hours a day across frozen battlefields now struggled to walk across a room. His military uniform, once stretched tight across a powerful frame, began to hang loose on his shrinking body. His face, once commanding enough to inspire 100,000 men to march into cannon fire, grew hollow and gray. His eyes, still sharp with intelligence, began to sink into dark circles of exhaustion and pain. But here's what's truly heartbreaking. Napoleon never stopped being Napoleon. Even as his body betrayed him, he still dressed in his imperial uniform every morning, still received visitors with the dignity of an emperor, still analyzed military campaigns and dictated his memoirs as though he could somehow think his way out of his own dying body. Pride can be its own form of torture, the death watch. By 1820, everyone knew what was happening, but no one dared say it out loud. Napoleon was dying. Not the quick, clean death of a soldier, but the slow dissolution of a man being consumed from within. His attendants kept detailed records as though documenting a scientific experiment. Night after night, they wrote about his fever dreams, his violent vomiting, his desperate attempts to find a position that might ease the fire burning in his gut. The British doctors continued their treatments. More bleeding, more mercury, more compounds that did nothing but accelerate his decline. Meanwhile, Napoleon's mind remained devastatingly clear. He knew exactly what was happening to him. He compared his fate to Caesar's, to Alexander's, but even they had died quickly. Napoleon was being tortured by time itself. In his lucid moments, he spoke of his son, of France, of the empire that might have been. But mostly, he spoke of how his life was being stolen not by British bullets, but by British medicine. The final horror, spring 1821, brought no relief, only escalation. May 3rd, Napoleon could no longer leave his bed. His breathing became labored, desperate, delirium set in, and he began speaking to phantoms, his mother, his soldiers, the ghosts of battles long past. May 5th, outside Longwood House, a storm raged across St. Helena as though nature itself was mourning. Inside, Napoleon Bonaparte drew his final breath. He was 51 years old. In his prime, he should have had decades left to live. The official cause of death, stomach cancer. But within hours, whispers began. Arsenic, poison, murder disguised as medicine. Hair samples taken after his death would later reveal arsenic levels 40 times higher than normal. Was it intentional poisoning, or simply the tragic result of 19th century medicine that used arsenic in wallpapers, tonics, and treatments? 2 centuries later, we still don't know for certain. The reckoning. When word reached Europe, the continent held its breath. Napoleon's enemies celebrated. The tyrant was dead. The man who had drowned Europe in blood had finally been stopped. But his supporters saw something else entirely: martyrdom. The British hadn't just killed Napoleon, they had transformed him into something far more dangerous than any living emperor. They had created a legend that would inspire revolutionaries for generations. France demanded his body back. In 1840, his remains returned to Paris in a ceremony that drew millions of mourners. Today, he lies beneath the golden dome of Les Invalides, in a tomb more magnificent than any palace he ever occupied in life. The bitter truth. Here's what makes Napoleon's death so haunting. It revealed the ultimate powerlessness of power. This was a man who had redrawn the map of the world, who had made kings tremble and emperors beg for mercy, who had commanded armies larger than entire nations. And yet, in the end, he was as helpless as any other human being, facing disease and death. His body, which had carried him across countless battlefields, became his final enemy. His mind, which had outmaneuvered the greatest generals of his age, could not strategize his way out of his own mortality. The British may have won the war, but they also revealed something terrifying about the nature of power itself. It's all an illusion. Strip away the armies, the palaces, the titles, and what remains is just flesh and blood, as vulnerable as anyone else. Why we can't look away. 200 years have passed, and we're still obsessing over how Napoleon died. Maybe it's because his death forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. That greatness is temporary, that power is fragile, that even the mightiest among us are just one illness away from becoming helpless shadows of ourselves. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe we're fascinated because Napoleon's death wasn't just an ending, it was a transformation. In life, he was an emperor. In death, he became something far more powerful, an eternal symbol of human ambition and its ultimate limits. The boy from Corsica had set out to conquer the world. In the end, the world conquered him. But the legend he left behind, that proved to be unconquerable. The final verdict, the agonizing death of Napoleon Bonaparte, wasn't just the end of a man, or even the end of an era. It was a reminder written in flesh and blood. No matter how high we climb, how many kingdoms we conquer, or how many armies follow our commands, we all share the same ultimate destiny. Napoleon died as he had lived, on his own terms, with dignity intact, refusing to surrender even to death itself. His body failed him, but his will never broke. And perhaps that's the most Napoleon thing of all. Even in defeat, even in agony, even stripped of everything that had made him great, he remained defiant to the very end. The emperor was dead, but the legend would prove immortal.